I want to debate my mom, convince her that trade deficits are bad. What are some talking points I could use to help? Some of this is complicated. Basically, there's just there's no good reason trade deficits are bad in and of themselves. So the first thing is that imports are the benefit of trade and exports are kind of sort of arguably the cost, right? So imports are the benefit of trade because where other countries are using their resources to produce things for us. Exports are the cost of trade because we are using our resources to produce for other countries. Think of it like, you know, if there were a ton of ships coming, if we loaded all of our like exports onto a ship and that ship sailed to the UK, they get a ton of goods, right? You know, that ship then gets loaded with everything that we bought from the UK and it comes back. But on the way back, it sinks. In this scenario, we have a trade surplus because we exported a ton of stuff to the UK and they did not, and we didn't import anything because their ship fucking sunk. Did we benefit from this? No, no, we didn't, because we exported shit without getting anything in return. Exports are one way that we can get foreign currency required to import, right? Another reason, this is kind of complicated. It's not that hard to. I can tell it's hard to understand why it is true. Just understand that it's not hard to understand this is true. But if you want to know why it's true, it's a little more complicated. The trade balance is equal to the, or is canceled out by the net inflow of capital. So if we're basically what this means, if we're running a trade deficit, what that means is we have an investment surplus. Other countries are investing in the US. This is true as a matter of accounting. If you're on a trade deficit, that's financed by a financial account surplus. If you, I mean, this is true. Anyone can Google this. But I mean, this is a good thing. So we want other countries to invest in us. That makes us more productive. That makes American workers more productive, and that increases their wages. That lets US businesses expand, right? They have more capital. They can do more shit. That's good for the US as a whole. That's good for all these companies getting investment. Trump himself, in between complaining about the trade deficit, brags about getting foreign investment. He says, I got SoftBank to invest $100 billion in the US. You know, that's investment. That's a good thing. So there's that. On the investment point, trade deficits don't even always necessarily. Trade deficits have a lot more to do with how much people within the country decide to save and how much within the country decide to invest. So the amount of investment that takes place in the US, or the amount of savings that take place in the US, the amount that Americans save, minus the amount of investment that we do, is equal to the trade deficit. So if we're not saving that much money, but we're doing a ton of investment, what that means is that the money that we're doing, or the investment that's being financed by foreign capital, that's not a bad thing because that investment wouldn't otherwise happened. And the implication of this is partly, again, that trade deficits are largely just a reflection of how much Americans decide to save, not how unfair Canada's trade practices are or how unfair Mexico's trade practices are. All it is how much Americans decide to save and how much Americans decide to invest. Trade deficit reflects the fact that America is such a good place to invest in that American savings alone can't finance it. Now, part of it is also a reflection that our savings rate could be a little bit lower because we have a very large government budget deficit. But a big part of it is that America's a really, really, really good place to invest. Everyone wants to invest their money here. That's a good thing. So imports are the benefit of trade, exports are the cost, and the trade deficit reflects financial inflows. It reflects investment inflows. But I mean, that's a good thing. I would say like those are the two big things. Well, those are kind of the big things about trade deficit. There's one more like specific claim that people make, so a lot of times studies that supposedly show like job losses from trade deficits say, hey, this trade deficit reflects the fact that instead of producing stuff in the US, we're producing stuff in China, right? I think EPI has a study that does this, and there's a few. They're not even really studies. They're not even formal papers, a lot of them. Pretty sure Trump said trade deficit is a bad thing, so I'm going to choose to believe that. Yeah, I know. He said there's subsidies, which is just not, I don't even know how to combat that they're subsidies, because it's just like so obviously not true. Like, I don't even know what to tell you. But they're like, oh, we could produce this thing in the US, but now we're producing this thing in Mexico, and that's reflected in the trade deficit because we're importing that thing instead of producing it here, right? We're importing that thing instead of producing here and or even exporting it. Something to remember here is that a lot of these, a lot of times when our bilateral trade deficit increases with someone, meaning our trade deficit with one specific country, for example, China in the 2000s increased because we started trading with China. A lot of that doesn't displace U.S. production. It displaces production in other countries that were already importing things to the U.S. So when we started trading with China, it's not like we were making many shoes here to begin with. It's that China started replacing importing shoes from Vietnam, right? Instead of importing shoes from Vietnam, we imported shoes from China. I don't actually know if the shoe thing is true. I'm just using that as an example. But you can see how just having a trade deficit with Canada doesn't necessarily mean we're displacing U.S. production. It could be that Canada is displacing production from other parts of the world. So we're not actually harming like U.S. jobs in any way. And we're probably overall benefiting, again, because of the investment inflow thing. But there's a lot of other countries that run trade deficits, and they're like fine. I mean, if you want to like, Paul Krugman also has an article about this. Germany is a country that it's not really in debt. They've committed to running fiscal surpluses, and they also have, that's their gross debt. It's only like 60% of GDP. And they also have a manufacturing trade surplus. There's a trade balance, manufacturing trade balance. This is what all the conservatives here want. We want to run trade surpluses. We want to have a balanced budget. Their GDP ain't looking too good to ours. This is their GDP growth rate. You'll notice it's fucking flat. It's barely changed since COVID. So they haven't grown at all. And guess what? They also had inflation. It's not like, it's not like, they haven't grown at all, but at least they didn't have 9% inflation. They also had 9% inflation. They've also seen inflation. Now, part of the reason they saw inflation was because the Ukraine war affected them more heavily because they relied more on Russian gas than we did. But still, brother. Anyway. What country makes a fucking ton of soybean and corn? Argentina. Holy shit. I'm fucking goated. Let's go. I knew it. I don't look at all the old streams where I guessed Argentina the first time too. Like not I got it correct the first time. Like I just guessed Argentina's my first guess a lot. Damn. I'm supposed America's growing, but we could be growing at a faster rate with no trade deficit. How? I don't think that's true. Unless you're saying that the trade deficit subtracts from GDP, which is not really true. The imports don't subtract from GDP. Their net effect on GDP is zero. So, like if we import something, the equation for GDP, C, that's consumption plus investment plus government spending, minus or plus net exports being exports minus imports, right? So, we have if we have a trade deficit, supposedly that's a subtraction because you're adding a negative number for net exports, right? But imports are included in, depending on what they're used for, either or imports are like invisibly included in the first three components of GDP, right? So like if I buy a shoe from China, that is subtracted in net exports, right? But it's also included in consumption. So if I buy a $30 shoe, that might be minus $30 in net exports, but it's also plus $30 in consumption. So the net effect is zero. It nets out. The net effect of imports in GDP is zero because they're by definition not included in GDP. GDP is everything we produce here. We don't produce imports here, so they're just simply not included. If you want to chat with me live, sub here or go to Nonfon420 on Twitch or Kick via the links below. Once again, please like and sub to help with the algorithm, and consider sending a donation through YouTube Super Thanks to directly support me, and I'll make sure to reply to any question you ask. See you guys next time.